Hi, this is Colleen Critcher at University Place Gallery, and today we're going to be talking with Adrian Rhodes about her current exhibition, Blood and Honey. Thank you so much, Adrian, for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me, Colleen. It's a pleasure to see you today.
Well, we're going to ask a good number of questions, so I hope that you're ready to talk about your work. I'm going to start with some obvious questions first. The exhibition was open for 1 week before we had to close due to the ongoing health crisis. In that time, we had about 70 gallery visitors, and the most common question that I got from those visitors was, what was the significance of the bees? And you use a lot of symbolic imagery, but the bees are the most predominant visual image of your work right now that I know of. So please talk a little bit about how you came to them and why they're so important to you.
Well, I've always been drawn to certain types of image, and I can really trace the bee back for a long time into my early undergraduate. I can remember a professor giving me an assignment to draw the sound of a swarm of bees. And that just kind of lodged in the back of my head as something that I found to be interesting. And I wound up revisiting it much later. I think that we're drawn to symbols for certain reasons. And when you're first drawn to an image, you don't necessarily understand why or what it means. But as you work with it and research it, you can come to a greater understanding of what that symbol means within your work. When I researched the bees, I found the matrilineal structure of beehives and bee society to be utterly fascinating. And they became a metaphor for me for examining these matrilineal relationships within my work. All of my work is related to my own personal experience. I have a very strong belief that artists can only tell their own story. It's very important to be true to your experience and your own expression. So my work is autobiographical in a lot of ways, and I do think it relates in its larger themes to a more universal experience. So on a personal level, I lost my mother before my daughters were born. I not only look at my children and see her influence on them still, but it's created a situation in my life where I was the daughter of a mother, and now I'm the mother of daughters, but I have never been both of these things at the same time. I was one, and then I became the other. So I've never felt the intersection of these two roles. When you look at honeybee hives and bee society, and if you look at the swarming process of how the new queen has a daughter and they raise her, and then the hive splits, and then you look at the bee structures of how all the workers are sisters and the relationships between all of them, it became a real chance for me to use bees as a metaphor for these matriarchal relationships, not just the mother-daughter bloodline, but also the roles of sisters within the work. So beehives are not only this strong analog to the matriline, but when you look at honeybees, the hives are somehow, they're both fragile and resilient at the same time. But they're also so vital to the world as pollinators that I find this mix of resilience, vulnerability, and the vital importance of the beehive to just further amplify the things I want to talk about within these matrilines. So the complexity of the beehive and the complexity of bee society, if you will, is a way for me to think about and talk about the complexity of these matrilineal relationships.
That's really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about some of your other symbols? You use a lot of star charts and bear claw marks. Pomegranates are the three that I immediately think of.
Yeah, so the sky charts are also, there's multiple angles to them that I find to be particularly interesting. The first is that sky charts are an and I'm going to pull up an image of some of my sky chart artwork while we talk about these. All right, so this is a collage series, and these are all based on the sky chart, and it's the same. These pieces are in the gallery, so you can go and you can see them when the gallery opens. They're all based on the same map. When I look at sky maps, the first thing that strikes me is that they are an attempt by people to categorize and control the universe in a way that you just can't. It's almost as if I count every star in the sky and I know exactly where it is right now, I know where it's supposed to be, I know where it was, therefore I know where it's going to be. And if I know that everything has a place and where those places are, then I can make my plans and order my life and you know, with the people and the places and the things that I care most about. Knowing that the universe is going to function in a certain way, I can move forward with my own control of my own life. And if anything about our current situation proves that feeling wrong, I mean, doesn't it? We can't control these outside events. We can't control the things that happen to us. But to me, looking at sky charts, it's an example of humanity's attempt to, through categorization and cataloging and, you know, like a really white-knuckled grip on control, understand the universe in a way that lets us preserve our own existence the way we want it to, which is utter folly, but something I feel like most people, if not on a conscious level, kind of understand that on a guttural level. At the same time, when you look at sky maps, one of the predominant features that jumps out of them is constellations. Constellations are fascinating for me because they come from Greek mythology. And Greek mythology is the first myth system where instead of some all-powerful, perfect being, you have a situation where man created God in his own image instead. So like if you look at the Egyptians, their deities are these animal-human hybrids with these really like removed from the human experience stories. But when you look at Greek mythology, you know, Zeus is supposed to be the king of Olympus and the mightiest of all the gods, but 98% of Greek mythology is Zeus behaving badly and then his wife being pissed off about it. So they're very human stories. The stories of the Olympians are the stories of heroes, and they're the stories of failings. You know, they aren't these perfect beings. They're these very human stories of jealousy and love and pride and folly. And so I find that by using an image of a constellation, you can pull in the associations of the myth that goes with it, which is a way to add another layer of meaning into the work. Another thing that I think to be really interesting about both of those is when you do look back at the mythology, the reason the constellations are chosen, it was almost kind of like a reward of sorts, where the gods would look at a situation and find a mortal or a semi-mortal to be too worthy to be forgotten in death and to go to the underworld. So they would take them and they would set them in the heavens to always be remembered. You know, so an example of that is the constellation Gemini is based off of Castor and Pollux, where one of the twins was divine and one of the twins was mortal. And so when the mortal twin died, they were so close and their bond was so strong that the Olympians didn't want to separate them. The mortal twin couldn't stay with the immortal twin any more than the immortal twin could go to the underworld with the mortal twin. So what they did is they set them in the heavens as the stars Castor and Pollux. And that's the root story behind the constellation Gemini, is that unbreakable bond between two brothers. So I find that idea of setting something in the stars to preserve it to be one more layer of interest and meaning within the constellation imagery. The bear marks the mauling that goes back ties into all of this that I've talked about so far. The constellation Ursa Major is the mother bear, and she was a nymph, I believe. But her son was a hunter, and she angered one of the gods, and they turned her into a bear. And so this is where the idea of the mother bear in the constellation comes from. Then you look back at the idea of the universe being upended through events. And for me, it's like an emotional kind of wounding, a traumatic experience of loss in people I've had in my own life. So this is that disruptive element that comes in and undoes that control that you look for when you're cataloging all of the stars and making all of your plans. So the wounding that shows up throughout my work, and how many different places in the gallery right now are there claw marks? I mean, they're in one piece open and spilling out paper, and another piece they're sewn up, and another piece they're just present, and another spot they're just like removed and isolated on the wall with nothing around them. So they're like really prevalent. So it's like each time I work with them, it's trying to like come to grips with that wounding experience or that violent upheaval of plans that you have within your work, within your life, not within your work. So my work is me trying to deal with my life in the same way that, not in the like particulars of my own story, but in the universal happenings that we all go through at some point.
Okay. Oh, you forgot to talk about pomegranates.
Oh, the pomegranates. I could talk about pomegranates for a whole hour, so I'll try not to. It's another variation on the same themes. Pomegranates are associated with Persephone, the queen of the dead. And so through her myth and her story, they tie back into the matriline. And so they have these themes of mortality. But also, pomegranates, when you open them up, they have this abundance of seeds. So they are about abundance and fruitfulness and plenty and splendor. They are embroidered on the festival tablecloths of various different cultures. There's a Jewish blessing that basically says, may your blessings be as numerous as the seeds of a pomegranate. So there's another one I think is really fascinating, is that there are Kabbalah traditions that believe that the pomegranate was the fruit of the tree of knowledge, not the apple. So it goes back to this idea of, I don't know, the divine feminine always. And so then you take all of this and you open up the pomegranate, and it's this abundant multitude of seeds. But unless you're really careful when you open it and it looks like a murder scene, because the juice just gushes forth in this torrent out and runs across the table, and it looks like it's bleeding out pretty literally when you open up your pomegranate. So I find pomegranates to be, it's not even like two sides of the same coin, because if something was two sides of the same coin, life and death, two sides of the same coin, then it's either heads or it's tails, right? It's one or it's the other. But pomegranates are both at the same time. So it's not a dichotomy. It somehow is a complexity of image and meaning where it's complete opposites that coexist. And I find that to be utterly fascinating. How can it mean two opposite things simultaneously, and not like the sun and the moon, the day and the night, where it's one is absence and the present of the other, but they're both there at the same time, and yet they're opposite. So I love it. I love pomegranates.
Okay. Let's change gears a little bit. You're a printmaker.
Yep.
Do you have a favorite printmaking method, and why?
My favorites, I've got two. They're tied. My two favorites are woodcut and stone lithography, followed closely by etching. So that's kind of where I sit. And it's because I love the process. So stone lithography is like the queen of printmaking mediums and methods, where you're using the grease pencils to draw on the limestone. And it's almost like an alchemy each stone has its own personality, and even the weather outside and where in the world you're working. So like the amount of humidity in the air is going to change and affect what's happening as you're working. So stone litho is just, it's like so interesting to work with and intriguing and seductive. Drawing on the limestone is just the most beautiful thing ever. There's literally a moment where you basically, it feels like you wave a magic wand over the press and then pray to the print gods, you know. So I love litho. But then I love woodcut, because to me, printmaking is basically drawing but harder. So it's another discipline of drawing, and all of your print tools are drawing tools. And I love the marks you get with the woodcut chisels. I love the sound that they make and the way they feel as you're cutting through the wood. And watching, whenever I'm working, I stain my wood red. So I'm gonna come over and I'll show you. When I'm working, I stain my wood red. And then as I'm carving, I carve away all of the red until only the image is left. And so there's just this really meditative process of carving away, and the marks that you get that make woodcut like really near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. So in addition to being a printmaker, you're also an educator, and you teach printmaking at USC in Columbia and also at Winthrop University. How does that experience play into your art making practice? Has it opened you up to new media or processes or anything like that?
Well, first of all, the best way to make sure you know something is to teach it to somebody else. Because in order to teach it to somebody else, you really have to understand it. So it's definitely made me a stronger technical printmaker, because if I'm giving a lecture every semester on this is how you do an aqua tint, I don't come to it after 2 years going, how do I do aqua tint again? And have to like relearn that curve. So it keeps the skill set fresh. But more than that, watching my students, and I have some students who I've been teaching for years now, they'll take my class over and over again. And so as I watch all of my students come to these techniques and come to these methods, it keeps it fresh, and inevitably they find ways to surprise me. And so when they surprise me with some take that they take on these materials and methods that I've been working with for a very long time now, it helps me keep that creativity and keep that flexibility within my own work, instead of getting stuck in the same trenches of thought that I would be going through over and over again. So I guess it helps keep me on my toes and keep me flexible to keep working with all of these young artists.
Awesome. You're obviously a very detail-oriented person. Do you think that this is a blessing or a curse in regard to art making?
Well, I have been known to exclaim in the middle of an installation that, for the love of all in the universe, why couldn't I have been a minimalist? But it's just a reflection of the way my mind works. And I think that even if I was a minimalist, I wouldn't be able to think about what I'm doing any less. So, you know, if I was painting a huge canvas where most of it was white, I still would have to think about every square inch of the white space and be like, should it be untouched white paper? Should it be like white paint, a warm white, a cool white? So you know what I mean? It doesn't matter how much visual complexity or visual simplicity there is within an artwork. You still have to think about every little bit of it with the same degree of intensity.
Right.
And the tricky thing as a super detail-oriented artist, I think, is letting go of perfectionism, because it goes back to that idea of control all over again. The same thing with the sky charts. If I can control every thread within the installation, every print, every bit of paper, And, you know, then everything will turn out just so. But you saw as I was installing in the gallery that that's not how I work.
Right.
I have like broad strokes of what I intend, but when I get into the space and I start placing my elements, I'm very flexible, even though in the end I'm thinking about every single thread and trying to consider every single angle. I'm very flexible with the process of seeing everything come into place.
Yeah.
So one more life metaphor for you there.
I have a couple of questions for you from Anna Dean, and she's one of our upcoming exhibition artists. She says, how does your thought process change when you shift from printmaking to painting to installation? And how does shifting between those processes inform your work?
Because I don't think I shift anymore. I don't think I shift from painting to printmaking to installation. I kind of my hand in all the pots at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the main thing about that is that I come from a very strong background of collage. Two of my biggest undergraduate influences were both very, very dedicated collage artists. And then in grad school, I worked with another artist who also was a very skilled collagist. So mentally, I'm always actually doing collage. It doesn't matter if I'm painting, printmaking, or doing an installation. From a theoretical and conceptual standpoint, it's collage. So it's making connections between disparate pieces and laying things beside each other in order to get that comparison and contrast between the elements. Another thing that I think about is people have analyzed Pollock paintings, which I love. I've always loved Pollock paintings. And they found that you can't tell what order the paint went down, right? So over here, the red is on top of the yellow, but over here, the yellow is on top of the red. So it's really interwoven. And whenever I'm approaching a painting or a print or a installation, I try to do that. I take a little bit from over here and I put it over there. I take a little bit from over here and I put it over there. I don't work on one piece at a time. I'll have, who knows, anywhere between 5 and 15 projects going at once in different parts of my studio or my studio in the print shop. And so I'll move between them, and what happens over here influences what's happening over there. What's happening over there influences what's happening over there. I'll give you a couple of quick examples pulling up on my screen here. So I'll start with this one. So here's a painting that I did, and you can see the pomegranates across the bottom, and it's got the paper airplane. And then this in turn influenced, there's a lithograph that I did. So bear with me just a hair while I do a bit of scrolling about on my feed. Backing it up. Here's one that's an example. So there's a stone, and you can see it's got the same major beats of elements within that composition. And so this litho will wind up collaged into other mixed media pieces. But also I went back and revisited the composition another time in a large scale woodcut I'm working on. And so this is the large scale woodcut, and it's 4 feet wide by 30 inches high. And so you can see the pomegranates and the airplanes on the one beef line are lifted from that, but then there's alterations to it. But now this, once it's printed, will get factored into other works. So what I'm trying to get at is that as I'm working, I think of it as a kind of an inheritance from one piece to another, to another, to another. So there is a literal progression of the imagery. There's another print that I'm working on right now. So you can see, kind of see in this image, it's another variation of the same theme. It's got the bees, it's got the sky charts, it's got the paper airplanes, but it's going in the Pomegranates. So it's going back and always thinking of it as not individual pieces, but as like steps within a conversation or moments of progression within the process and within the practice. So there isn't really a shifting of gears as it shifts from medium to medium, from painting to print to installation, because it's always constantly meandering through all these different expressions, and then it bends back on itself and then folds over into a new layer. So I don't think art making is about getting an answer. For me, it's a type of philosophy, and it's always thinking about going deeper. So it's not about asking a question that leads you to an answer. It's about asking a question that leads you to another question. And as that cycles in on itself and folds under and folds under and folds under, it keeps all of the work very tightly related. It's like it's spiraling around itself as I keep doing stuff.
Okay. Did you ever have like an aha moment when you realized that your work needed to become more than just traditional wall pieces, or was the move to installation a slow transition?
Well, it was a pride thing, to be honest. I did a show probably 5 or 6 years ago now. I can't remember exactly. It was actually at the Francis Marion Art Center Gallery. And you've got a lovely gallery space, but then it's got these glass cases that go along one side of the gallery that you can see the outside from. And so I was offered a solo exhibition, and the gallery director very logically said, all right, so you can have the solo show, but I'll find a sculptor or ceramicist to fill the cases. And I said, no, you won't. You offered me a solo. That means it's the me show. So I'll be taking the cases. And the director was like, but you're a painter and a printmaker. All of your work is flat. What are you going to put in the cases? And I said, hold my coffee. All right. So I said, trust me on this one. I guess I had no like sculptural work to show. Now I, up to that point, had been doing what I was calling like 2.5 dimensional work, where the stuff would like peel back from the surface a little bit, or have another element set off of the wall so that the shadow was cast behind it. And when I did my MFA thesis, a lot of it was work that was offset from the wall and then had the shadow projected behind it. So it wasn't truly sculptural or truly installation, but it was definitely leaning hard against that. And so then as soon as I did the sculptural pieces, which were my polyhedra, those are my polyhedra. I'll pull up my polyhedra. So as soon as I did my polyhedra, which were the first sculptural, truly sculptural thing that I did, here they are hanging. As soon as I did these, they were an installation. And as soon as I did my first installation, I was hooked. And so I keep taking it to different places and doing different things with it. But each time that I do, I find different little aspects of the particular gallery space that I'm in to highlight and interact with in different ways. So the same work changes drastically every single time that I install it.
Okay. And we just had a 2-week period of installation and I got to see your process. But a lot of people are unfamiliar and wonder certain things about installation. One of the questions that I got a lot was, how does she know when the piece is finished?
Well, in one respect, it's never finished. There's always a next time. And so every time that I do it again, you take it to a new place and do new things with it. It's finished when it's finished. I mean, I How do you know when you're finished dancing? There's a much crasser analogy that I've heard, but I'm not going to go with that one, but I'll say it has to do with the bedroom. So how do you know when finished is finished? You finished when you're done. Right? I wish I had something more to that. You're finished when you step away from it and there's nothing else you can do. Or you're finished when you go just a little bit too far and then you stand back and you look at it and you realize it's away a little bit too much. And so then you go and you take just a little bit more away. And when I was working, I think you saw that happen where I would go just a little bit too far and then step back and go, nope, nope. And then backtrack just about like 20 minutes and then be like, yes, that's where it stays. So I don't know.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the artists that have influenced you over the years?
Okay, so right now, my big crush is the very appropriately named Swoon, who is to die for. And she's a printmaker and also street artist. And she just does the most amazing print installations. And they incorporate pattern and color and the figure and mythology and screen printing and woodcut and relief, and they're just huge and complex and fascinating. And so she started doing animation, and I'm just like, wow, like where is she not going to take her printmaking? And so I just am utterly enthralled by her right now. Another artist is Delita Martin. She goes by Black Box Press on Instagram. And she is just a little bit more traditional of a printmaker than Swoon, but only barely. She is doing these absolutely huge, larger than life figurative pieces, massively large prints that incorporate woodcut and lithography and collage and embroidery and all of these different. So when I say a little bit more traditional, what I mean is that she just stays just a little bit more, and that everything she's doing is printmaking, but she takes the entire print shop and throws it at these enormous pieces of paper and makes these textured, gorgeous works that are based in printmaking and with just a little bit of collage element to them that just blow me away every time I look at them. So those are my two big ones right now.
Very cool. And this is going to be my last question for the day. What advice do you have for younger artists?
The first is to make as much as you can and not worry about what it looks like, which is hard because we all want to make stuff that makes people go, ooh, you know, that's part of why we do it, because we want this beautiful thing. And I've heard people talk about it's the tragedy of good taste, all right? So the reason you got into this whole art making venture is you have absolutely fantastic taste. You have something to say and you know what's good when you look at it. But when you're first starting out, your technical skills don't match your taste yet. And so you go through this period of time where it's a mismatch, where you know, you look at it and you know that it's not there. And it's very important to persevere until your skill set starts to match your conceptual view and your inherent taste. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, you've got to persevere through the time when you're learning the hand-eye coordination, the observational drawing part of it, the academic part of it. You have to persevere through the period of time where what you make isn't very good and you know it's not very good, but the fact that you know it's not very good is the proof that you will be good if you stick with it. So it's working through that and just working as much as you can until you get to that point. And if you can let go of your desire for perfection within your work before you get to that point, you'll be happier along the way because nothing's ever perfect. There's always something to take into the next piece.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Adrian.
Thank you for having me. And I hope that you guys get a chance to get into the gallery and see the show once this craziness is done. So let's hope.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we get to some normal very soon. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.